So next up is separate. Now, this might sound a bit like split, but it is similar, but also very different. Now, I've kept my hide on hide thing, or select connected scene, and I'll just show you what separate does. There are several options for separate. You can, well, first off, the keyboard shortcut is P. And if you do this in edit mode, because in object mode, it starts the game engine. And that's not what we want. We want in edit mode. So P, what it does is it brings up this menu. You have separate selection, separate by material, or separate by loose parts. So say you select this cube here using L. Well, you can separate this cube into a separate object by pressing P, separate by selection. And it is now an independent object that you can modify on its own. And you can do this with this one too. And now you have 3 objects, 1, 1, 1. But it's still not. What if you wanted to do every single one of these, and say you had a lot more of them? Like, just a second. Let me just rejoin that there. Say you have a lot more cubes, and you just want to be able to modify each one independently without having to go through the trouble of separating each one by hand. Well, to do that, press A to select all your cubes, press P, and instead of separate by selection, separate by loose parts. Now, what this does is that it takes all the unconnected bits, a bit like when you select with L, and it just separates them into independent objects, so that you can easily modify individual ones without having to separate each individual one by hand. So, of course, this is a bit extreme, the number of cubes that you could modify, but I don't know, you can do it, so it's probably there for a reason. And let me just undo that. So yeah, that's it. There's also separate by material. Now, that's probably when you have several materials, you can separate each part by which material it has assigned to it. I've actually never used it because I actually never really noticed it. But let me just try it here while I think of it. Just create a new material, create another one, and make it red, or maybe a bit more pinkish. Come on. And then just assign it to this face here, and maybe just these faces, or just select a few faces at random. Just click assign, and why is it not working? Set assign. There. And A, P, separate by material, and you now have these independent objects that are organized by material. So yeah, that's pretty useful, I think. Yeah, it's pretty smart, actually. So yeah, that's separate. Next up is mirror, almost our last one, and yeah, let's get to it. So the mirror tool is a very useful tool, but it's also very similar to the mirror modifier in the modifier panel. Now I'll demonstrate the mirror option first. So first off, I have this weird looking object here just so we can see what we're doing, and I have the 3D cursor, which is this crosshair here, set to the center of the object using Shift S 3. And I also change the pivot point down here to the 3D cursor so that anything you do is based on where the 3D cursor is. So if I move it over here, it rotates around that point. So the mirror modifier right now, if I just change this over to median point like it usually is, I duplicate this using Shift D and then press Ctrl M to activate mirror, and I can either choose X for the X-axis, Y, or Z, and as always I can also switch to local axes, but right now it's not doing much because our object is just like this. So let's try that. Control M, X will rotate it like this, but if you press X again, it'll mirror it along its local axis. So let's try that again, except that this time we'll change the pivot point over to 3D cursor. So let's select this, Shift D, Escape, Control M, X, and you get an exact replica, mirrored replica, on the other side of the 3D cursor. So I'll give you another example. Let's say you move this over 2 degrees or 2 units, Shift D to duplicate, Control M, X to mirror along the x-axis, and you get it further away because of where the 3D cursor is. It's exactly like if you had a mirror along the y-axis here. So yeah, that's mirror. I did mention the mirror modifier, so I'll just show you what that does. Mirror, and it basically does the exact same thing as the mirror tool. It's just that it's an actual modifier that you can switch on and off, and you can also change the parameters, and also which object you can actually set a mirror object. So say I have this over here, and I add in a Suzanne and move her over here, and change this over to monkey. It would now use the Suzanne's location to determine where to position the mirrored object. So that's a very useful feature. I'm guessing it could be used in certain animations if you change the location of your target object. So yeah, that's mirror. Really, the only thing that determines if you use mirror or mirror modifier is probably just personal taste as well as the project you're working on. It depends on what you're trying to do, the effect that it'll have, how you're trying to duplicate it, stuff like that. So the Invert Selection tool is our last tool in this video. It's very similar to the Invert Selection tool in GIMP, and it also shares the same keyboard shortcut, bizarrely. But let's just try it out here. Say you wanted to select all these cubes except for this one. Well, you could go ahead and just press A to select everything and press Shift L to deselect. Well, you could also use Invert Selection. Now, say you select this cube, and I want to select everything else. Well, you press Control I, and you immediately switch the selection from what is selected to everything else. Invert Selection. So you can use this with hide and select connected, which I explained earlier. Select this one, Control I to invert the selection, and hide everything else. It's a technique I used in my Skyward Sword project. I had the controller, the top piece of the controller, and I wanted to hide everything except that piece. So I selected that piece and inverted the selection and hid everything. So it can be used to hide everything that you don't want to keep in your way. So you select everything that you want to keep and then hide the rest using the Invert Selection and Hide tool. So that's pretty much it. We're actually done. We've gone through 16 tools: grab, rotate, scale, extrude, delete, create face, loop cut, subdivide, duplicate, split, recalculate normals, hide unhide, select connected, separate, mirror, and invert selection. Now I might have gotten those in the wrong order, but well, I got them all anyway. So also I thought I would just give you an idea of what these tools, when used properly, can achieve. Now please keep in mind that this is still a work in progress, but the main base of the object, the base shape, is final, really, or it's close to final. So I've opened up my Skyward Sword Celebration project, and in this project I haven't really used anything that I haven't actually covered here. There are a few little tools that I have used that were not covered, but really it's very, very basic stuff. So you can see here that this mesh is much more complicated than anything I've shown you. And we can see right now that this is fairly dense, and this is fairly dense, and I have normal viewing enabled. And these are all created using the same methods. So this one, the controller, which is final, the rest of the console, which is finished, this piece, these are all made using the same techniques that were demonstrated in this video. So I hope this video helped, that you've discovered a few new tools, or if not, maybe understand a few of the tools that you've been using. And see you soon.